is, in my opinion, and one of the reasons I'm on this board, is the greatest asset we have in this community. Unfortunately, this kind of work has not been done in the past. Had it been done 50 years ago, we might not be in this position right now, where we're at. I graduated this school in 1974, and essentially this building is the same building that I attended, with very little modification. However, there's a lot of things that go on in this building that didn't go on in 1974. Number one, my class had about, at most, a dozen African American students. Right? Now we have, about 21%, right? Plus another 8-9% of biracial students, and then a significant amount of Hispanic and Asian students. Things that weren't here, and this building was not designed for. Right? It was special needs students. Right? There were no special needs students, very few. I think there were 4 or 5 special education teachers here in the early 1970s. Certainly handicapped, Down syndrome, autistic children were not in this building. This building was not built to accommodate them. All right? There was no ADA compliance issues because there weren't standards at that time. There was no accommodations and no thought process for transgender, all right, or non-binary gender fluid students or adults. There was no technology. The technology in this building was in the auto shop. That was technology. The vocational education that's provided today is different than it was back then. You have engineering, you have coding, you have STEM and STEAM. All right. Much different than what we had in terms of plumbing, electrical kinds of things. And I'm not saying that those things don't exist or shouldn't exist in this building, but there's much more that's been added. The evolution of collaborative and student-centered learning wasn't here. We all sat in desks. They're still here, and they're in some very large lecture halls. While the teachers spoke, we took notes. We didn't collaborate. The closest thing to collaboration was you had a lab partner in a science lab. There was no daycare in this building. Now there's daycare in collaboration with the Forest Community Center. We take care of some very young children. The growth of our arts programs, all right, has been exponential. And the opportunities that the kids have, whether it's performing arts or the other arts programs, all right. The increased participation in other extracurricular activities, especially sports. There was no Title IX at the time. Well, I think Title IX maybe had just come on the horizon. All right, but the participation in girls' sports was very small. Now, girls' sports, and Mr. Stelzer's not here, but girls are participating at rates almost equal to boys. So those things, those needs that have evolved over the years have to be addressed, and they have. Unfortunately, they haven't been. And so it's our job as stewards of this district in the community, to do what's best in the best interest, now and in the future. We hear all the comments. We understand the tax issues in this community, along with the tax issues around the state. And we need, I want to thank you for this, because we need to get to work, the board, to do our work in terms of figuring out funding, to figure out what we can afford, to figure out our prioritization, which you guys have given us an incredible outline. And the work that you've done, and I said this last week, I think, or the week before at the town hall, has really changed my perspective. It really puts accessibility, especially for our special needs kids, on top. All right. It also puts the climate in a welcoming environment and a safe, comfortable to make this building safe and comfortable for all students is a high priority. And also the expanded access to resources. When I walk through this building, and I've done it in the last couple of weeks several times, and you see kids at all times of day out in the hallways, whether it's spoken word, whether it's music, all right, whether it's kids working on some kind of a project that I don't even know what it is. They're out there, and they're in the hallways, and not in classrooms, not at the library, not at collaborative spaces, and that's needed. All right. We also need safe and adequate spaces for our extracurricular activities. I fully advocate that we take a look at outside funding. We have it very robust. We have a very accomplished alumni. Colleges do it all the time. Private schools do it all the time. And I think that as we go forward, this is one of the things that we should deeply explore. If it's viable, great, let's go forward. If it's not, okay, we know that we're going to be restrained a little more than we thought financially. So again, I just want to thank you, thank everybody who was involved. I sincerely hope, and I think it was our part of the initiation of this process was the hope that we could come to some kind of a reasonable community consensus going forward. All right, I think you've given us a plan. Like Dr. Pruitt-Adams said, this is not a project. This is not committing to spending one nickel. All right. But it outlines what's needed in this building to go forward for the next 7 years. So I want to thank you very much.
I wanted to again thank Dr. Pruitt-Adams and her team, as well as thanking the entire Imagine team for all the work that you've done. It's appreciated, and it's evident the hours and time that you've put into this endeavor. I'll be voting to accept the Imagine Master Plan as written for a few reasons. First, I think it's irresponsible for us not to accept the facilities master plan. The staff has done a phenomenal job of maintaining the building over the years, but given the age of the building being over 100 years old, no significant renovations being done in the last 50 years, it's not sustainable to continue to operate the way that we have been operating. I've sat through several meetings that we've had where we've talked about capital improvement projects, and we've gone around and around and around and debated, should we do this? Well, what about the pools? Well, what about a long-term master plan? And decisions don't get made because everyone feels paralyzed because there is no roadmap. It's just not a sustainable way to live. So we need to have a roadmap and make decisions moving forward. Second, I might not agree with everything that's in the plan, but that's not what's before us. What's before us is just accepting the plan overall and making decisions as we go in terms of priorities. The work that the Imagine team has done has been rigorous. When listed it out in terms of the amount of meetings with students, with faculty, visiting other schools, having community engagement sessions, the work has absolutely, in my mind, been conducted through a lens of equity. It has been needs-driven, and most importantly for me, it's been student-centered. And the work that this group has done pales, the work of the facilities plan that was done in 2016 pales in comparison to the work of Imagine. I was part of that process, so I think I have a right to criticize it. I was in the room, and there were no studies done. There were no comparisons of other schools. The tours of the school were limited, and quite frankly, it was run strictly from the perspective of the architects of record at the time. So this is not the same type of work that was done by Imagine, so that's completely unfair to make that connection. Next, for me, the plan is rooted in what's in the best interest of our students. I normally don't get choked up when talking about facilities, but tonight Lynn brought tears to my eyes as she was reading the comments from the students. I appreciate you bringing their voices into the room. I wasn't going to say this, but I've been very troubled by some of the rhetoric that I've been hearing from the public. I feel that the word equity has been thrown around and our students have been used as props. And I can say that when I saw public comment being made and waved, our black students being waved at, used as props to make the point. That's not right. So thank you, Lynn, for bringing the voice of our students, because that's why we're all here in the room. And thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah, I have a couple of things I wrote down. 6 pages, small type. So, anyone need to take a rest for a break? I'm gonna, just some notes that I wanted to make sure I covered. So first of all, I do greatly appreciate the value of long-term board vision. That's what we needed, and so for that, I say thank you. I was one who was really more accustomed to starting with a budget, and I was somewhat uncomfortable with an approach without budgetary constraints. In some ways, now, I feel the approach taken was better because I do know that there are things that have been unearthed that would not probably have been unearthed, and they've changed my thinking. So that's that side. But on the other side, no budget, I think causes a bit of a challenge, to put it mildly. And it puts the board where the board needs to be, which is now we need to take and prioritize and do work. Regardless, I am truly appreciative of all the work that the Imagine team has done. You've delivered, as outlined, a comprehensive plan to address both short-term and long-term facility needs, and I thank you. This is not a pool plan. This is a facilities plan. So that's what was asked for, and that's what we get. While the scope is comprehensive, the long-term, resources required are daunting, and well beyond what our current financial capabilities may be as a district. And the one issue I struggle with in the plan is that the recommendations page does, kind of, with a plan that doesn't have budgetary requirements, it has budgetary assumptions kind of implied in it. So I struggle with that, okay? I greatly appreciate all the input that's in here, but this in some ways makes assumptions that we have not yet got to. So any acceptance I have is truly of the content that we can then act upon, and not acceptance of the recommendations as outlined. I cannot do that because it doesn't take into account what our job needs to be. We will need to be, our job will be to prioritize. There's a lot of substance in this plan and a lot of great things for us to look at. But we will need to look at that. We've got discussions coming up in the month ahead, and we need to figure out what to do, what we can afford to do, and what sequence we can do it that best supports what our students. I believe everything we would need to do is here, so that you've done your work, or there's more? Well, yeah, there will be more because we're going to get something a little later. So that my input is that I accept the plan in terms of the content. I have reservations about the recommendations because I don't believe I'm not accepting the recommendations or to implement the recommendations. That's our job to do work.
So as the lone board member who voted against formation of the Imagine Work Group, I feel the need to address now retrospectively sort of what my thought process was at the time. Partly it was because in the wake of the 2016 referendum, I thought to myself, I am not okay with passing on this responsibility because it's been so difficult and painful. That being said, you guys did a far better job than I think we as a sitting board ever could have done. So for that, we are so grateful. Not to mention, thank you for not making me have to do it. Like, that is just a debt I can never repay. But the scope and the depth and the thoughtfulness and the detail with which you looked at each and every part of this plan is astonishing. So thank you to you and thank you to your team. It's been amazing. I also want to add, I have loved watching this friendship blossom between Lynn and Mike. That has actually been very charming, and I appreciate that greatly. It's made me very happy. So but I really can't thank you enough, and to Karen and to Dr. Fredette. I mean, you guys did just outstanding work. I mean, this is a testament to all things that make this community so great. Is the fact that we have people who are willing to step up and take responsibility when your elected officials decided that it maybe wasn't the best time for us to try to do the same work. So thank you. That being said, I don't want you to be at all dismayed if we do change the plan. Because as you know, that's likely to happen, and it's sort of implied in the process. That's what a master plan, of course, is. I don't know that our community appreciates that. But the reality is we will probably be making some modifications. This is sort of like our dream. But reality is often a little bit more somber. So in any event, I just wanted to address my initial misgivings about formation of this group and say thank you and how much we appreciate all of your time and energy.
I just walked in. I'm not feeling well tonight, so this will be very short. I'm sure that will disappoint everybody. I want to thank, Lynn and Mike. I've had a lot of conversations with both of them through this process, and I know that they and the whole team have worked very hard on this plan. I think the plan is a great default roadmap for us to go forward with, and a great place for us to discuss around. Without, we wouldn't be able to move forward. So thank you very much for that. I am in a similar place with Tom that I believe that some of these recommendations, and now is not the time to really be specific, but some of these recommendations imply financing and how we finance it. So I have some issues with support of some of these recommendations. I think we'll flush that out in the financing discussion as we go forward. So I have a little issue there. And really, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I want to feel like we're at the some awards ceremony. I'd like to thank everybody for their hard work, and while Sarah, Mike, and watching your friendship blossom, it felt like a little sibling relationship to me. So I appreciate also seeing that when you did disagree about things, it was in a way that was still informative for all of us, and I appreciate that. I never felt like there was a show being put on, that it was very authentic, and all of the work that was done to everybody's points. We didn't even know what to ask for, and I'm a true believer in shared leadership and collaboration, and our community steps up in ways that's incredible. I mean, knowing that they're being at all of the various meetings and hearing the people on the Imagine team that have walked every inch of this building, and all of the talk with students and staff and community. I can't imagine, we're gonna have to figure out a new word, I'm gonna have to get my thesaurus out. I wonder what process could be more inclusive and transparent. And so I appreciate all of that. I also wanted to thank Matt and Fred for being the board liaisons, and just being the observers and stepping back when needed to be more observant than participant, even though it's hard when you're trying to be enmeshed in the process. But I really appreciate that they were able to keep the board informed in a way that perhaps the community isn't aware of, but that we were aware of kind of the steps along the way. And being on this board during our first process that Jennifer alluded to, it has always been the need for a master facility plan, the same way we have a strategic plan, the same way we do financial forecasting. It makes very little sense to not have some idea of what you need and what your roadmap is. And I appreciate that this board is willing to be proactive as opposed to reactionary, which gets you into so many traps of never being able to really work on policy and governance issues, which is what we were elected to do. So this feels like we have been given board work, and it's time for us to do our work. And I'll just say that in terms of when I look at the plan, the student-centered aspect of it, as it talks about equity, the comments about not looking at physical education or not looking at our extracurriculars, and I always think back to, it's just one quick example of I'll just give one student, there are several, but if students aren't exposed to things, they don't know if they can do them or not. And so the notion of taking away things or saying we don't need, and our students are saying something very different about what their needs are, I think is counterintuitive to education. And there's a student that graduated a few years ago who didn't know how to swim, but at the end of her 4 years had a water polo scholarship to college. And would that have happened if PE wasn't a requirement here? She had to learn how to swim to be on the water polo team, and she did learn how to swim to do that. And so, I think of that, I think of kids that never played field hockey that got scholarships in field hockey and lacrosse and things like that. And so, if we're going to really talk about equity, it has to be through the lens of, allowing our students to see what the possibilities are and not to decide for them what they need. And I hope that we can be as visionary as this community claims to be, and at the same time be grounded in the realities of doing our job in a way that is responsible fiscally, as well as keeping at the center the best needs of our students. So there's so much here that is information, and to Matt's point, we have a lot to go over, so I'm encouraging all of our board members to not wait until they see the agenda before doing some review, and there are questions that are going to come up, so if those could be given to our administrators, as well in advance as possible, so that we can be intentional about kind of sticking to the dates that we put before ourselves. I think that everybody would appreciate that. So if there is nothing further, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey? Yes. Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Eisner?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you. I will, thank you. Are there, we did say that we would allow for public comments after this action item. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Yes.
Thank you, I'm Gail Galvin, and I raised 5 kids in Oak Park, and happy to be here tonight. Usually I'm working. I just want to thank everybody, commend everybody on all the work they've done. And I think, this equal billing financially and otherwise for the equity personally, social, emotionally, and with facilities is, a great, way to move forward that people are talking about, so I appreciate that. So there's, without one, it's not going to work. Without the other, it's just not going to work. We need a holistic system. And I'm just pointing out, if you haven't heard of Sean Harper, PhD, professor of urban leadership, University of Southern California. He did research about 40 schools, high schools, public schools, and, outcomes. How did students overcome racial inequities and, microaggressions, macroaggressions throughout their high school years and become college ready and very successful in life. So that's just something to follow up on that might be interesting. Thanks.
Harper.
S-H-A-U-N, Harper, H-A-R-P-E-R.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to make public comment? Okay. Small town city. Oh, yeah, you have to vote. So I will move to approve the building maintenance strategy 2019 and 2020 and ask for a second.
Second.
The building maintenance strategy 2019-2020, with consideration of the long-term facilities plan, imagine we need to consider how we will handle ongoing maintenance as factored into this plan. So tonight we're bringing forth a recommendation for the upcoming summer work, and we will ask the board to, at the conclusion, approve an additional $5.4 million for capital improvements for 2020. This is in compliance with strategic plan goal 6, facilities, as well as district policy 4:150. Turn it over.
Okay, first thing I'd like to acknowledge the team here. Fred Cruz, who's our Director of Buildings and Grounds, and Cindy Sidor, who's our CSBO. This has been an effort. When the Imagine Team project came along, we realized we had a book of maintenance work that still had to be taken into consideration. So one of the first things we did, and it was in concert with the Imagine Team, is we looked at the plans, the book of maintenance that we had on our plate already, and we met with the Imagine Team and eliminated all of the overlaps between them. That constituted them taking some money out of their plans. We basically took some money out of our maintenance plans. So that was our first step. The second step we went through is we looked at all the projects that were remaining, and we looked at those projects that were urgent and needed to be done. We moved those forward to the work that was going to be done, assuming that Imagine would start in the fiscal year 2021, July of 2020, fiscal year 2021. So that was an assumption that we made when we put this plan together. We also looked at what on our book of work could be delayed till after the bulk of the Imagine work was done. We made an assumption of a 6-year Imagine project. These were all basic assumptions we made to try to put together a plan. And if you remember the presentation, some of the presentations by Dr. Grossi talking about taking some of the money from the capital spend and making those funds available for the Imagine project. That was another goal we had in mind here. So what we're trying to do is move the projects forward that had a sense, the maintenance projects forward that had a sense of urgency, that could not wait. We looked at the projects that could wait and moved them afterwards. And then we looked at what would land in the middle. And the major one that lands in the middle that we really just couldn't get away from is the roof. And the roof is embedded in here. There's some charts here that illustrate that, but if you look at the roof, that only hits in several of the years, and some of the other years we could really knock maintenance down to bare bones minimum. So if you really look at the averages, it works out pretty well. It works out very well in terms of what Dr. Grossi had proposed, in terms of some of the scenarios he put forward. So what we're looking to do is take the normal spend, which is roughly about $4 million a year, and we're looking at an additional $2 million. So $4 million for 2 years would be $8 million. We're looking for another 2.1, something like that. We're looking for a $10 million spend between 2019, which is mostly, it's out on the street in terms of the bid right now, and 2020. So the difference, what we're looking for is 4.6, that's already been approved by the board. So we're looking for an additional 5.4. But it's really not exactly 5.4, because we already have, if we had a 10-year maintenance plan, and we would have been asking for 3.3 anyway. So every year we follow this maintenance schedule, and this year of 2020, we would have been asking for 3.3. So realistically, we're asking for an additional 2.1 over what we would have normally asked for. Let's see, what else was I going to say here? The one other thing I just wanted to mention, we're not really asking for approval of this evening, is there is a $5.1 million life safety, set of life safety projects that is shown in the illustration. And that, we're actually recommending we go to life safety bonds to do that. But I think that conversation should wait till we have the conversation on Imagine funding next month. So I think that would make the most sense. Are there any questions?
Let's start out with on the life safety issue. We know it was around 5 million, or you said 5.1?
5.1.
Right. But was any of that included in the Imagine?
No.
No, because I remember there were like a lot of doors to rooms or
Fred, you want to talk
Yes.
about?
thresholds or whatever.
There were a lot of doors and door jams that
Right.
no longer have fire labels. So
And so when we in the Imagine plan, were the renovation of those rooms, that wouldn't have been included?
it all depends on what the renovation is going to include in the room. That hasn't been determined yet.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know if Mike or Lynn could address that, if they know.
Overlap?
Overlap on doors?
Yeah. We're between a little bit of a rock and a hard spot here, but the design work for the first phase, the first sequence, which involves 76 classrooms, needs to get just a little further down the road before we can definitively answer that question. But there is the potential for some, if those classrooms are going to be renovated as part of the sequence one, and if that's what the board decides to proceed with as part of the first piece of business, there is the potential for some overlap there.
So the other question I have is, we already approved like, what, 4.6, I think?
Yep.
We approved. And so there's a big spend on the stadium.
Yep.
Okay, which is, almost $2 million of the additional, make it up to 7. What, can you get a little more specific as to what the needs in the stadium are? And where, it's kind of a two-part question. And when they would have fallen in place in your schedule in a, in a normal sequence of events?
The first part of your question was exterior brickwork, tuck pointing, repairing of some of the railings, refinishing of the railings, painting and cleaning of the concourse area, limestone capping all the way at the top of the bleachers, all the expansion joints. Like when it rains outside, it tends to rain inside a little bit because of the expansion joints. They have, I think the last time it was touched was probably 2003 is to the best of my recollection.
That's when they were almost a total renovation, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a pretty good facelift.
And when would that have fallen in your, in the normal course of, when would that have come up?
We were gonna be working it in the next 2 or 3 years, phasing everything in. We just thought, because of the Imagine project, we thought it might be better just to hit everything at one time and just be done, because Imagine really wasn't looking at the stadium building. Very minor things, I think, that they had included.
So I mean, the real ask here is, over a 2-year period, is an additional $2.1 million, right?
Yep.
That's all.
I'll just ask the obvious question, and don't be insulted by it, okay? But it's, I think that, I know what you're striving to do, right? The whole tension of not spending money that, whoops, a year or 2 years, or some short-term time later, we do the work, you know, we have to undo the work, or it's redundant. And I guess, to the best of your knowledge, based on some unknown variables, I guess, how long before that scenario would play out? Because it sounds like you said, the stadium isn't really being touched by the Imagine plan imminently or even longer. And so I guess if you could just address my meandering thought/question.
I'm not, do you mind if I ask you to repeat it? I'm not sure I got the question.
Verbatim, I was reading from the script
Yeah,
here.
okay.
No, just basically just a reassurance or just comment on how this is, won't be a redundant thing, won't be something that we regret doing.
Yeah, so the difficulty, as I said, one of the first steps we did, because it was necessary to do for Imagine anyway, was really to go through with the Imagine team what we were doing and what they were doing and looking for the overlap. To Fred's point, the level of detail that is articulated by them to get that estimate, in many cases, is not sufficient to know for sure. But there were certain things that popped, that we knew, for example, the flooring, we had a big number in there for flooring. We took all of that out because we assumed flooring would definitely be part of what they had built into their estimates. So it's not, because of the fact this really isn't a construction plan, we had to make together some assumptions about what they were doing and what we were doing and where the overlap was. So to the extent possible, for example, one example I'll give you is the roofing. We looked at the areas that were being impacted by Imagine the portion of the building where the roofing would be impacted. So we took the square footage of that, subtracted it out of our plan. But this is all based on estimates. So to the best of our knowledge, because it's not actually a construction plan, which is what we've been saying, I'm pretty confident that the things that we're talking about, at least in these accelerated items, there's no overlap, or the overlap is minimal. Life safety is a different thing. I think we have to circle back on that one, but.
Okay, thanks. I guess I would say anything that we can hold on for as long as we can. And everything you're saying is being seconded by Mike's very vigorously nodding head, which reassures me, so thank you. And I appreciate the ongoing dialogue that clearly has been going on.
Except for life safety.
And I said,
Right.
yeah.
So I'd like clarity, when we talk about approval of funds, there's approval of capital spend, and there's approval of an annual budget that is inclusive of that. Okay? So can you please clarify that when we're talking about this, what fiscal year budget would this request that we're talking about go into?
Cindy, you want to handle that for us? You can speak, Cindy can't speak loudly, so.
So what we have is in 2019, you already have part of the money that's been expended for this year in here. So that was the 4.6. So now we're looking for the rest of the 7 million that they need to start, it would be it would actually fall into 20 is where it's gonna actually fall. So they're gonna start here with the 4.6 for the 7 million, but then the second half would fall into 2020 fiscal year.
So let me just clarify, because my whole thread here is 2 words, balanced budget.
Correct.
We've talked about, if we talk about that last month and then we begin by executing otherwise, you lose me quickly. So if this is, we're now into the next fiscal year and this is something being put in, then that's just gonna change how we need to manage that year.
Correct.
But we're not opening up an existing, but we're not doing anything to the budget that was approved recently.
Yes.
I don't know, last month, last couple months. This is for.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
One last question, I'm sorry. So by doing this and spending some money up in the first 2 years, we're and then holding back during the course of some imagined projects, whatever they may look like, we're gonna be loosening up or opening up some availability of capital. All right. How much are we looking at? Then
In the 2 years?
no, over the 9-year period that's on this chart.
12 million.
12 million?
Yeah, well, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, if you take an average of it.
Correct. Yes.
So part of the dilemma is that because of the roof, the numbers don't work out that way. It's not like every year you get 2
No,
million.
I understand.
So if you look at an
the
average, you're
graph.
gonna get your 12 million, but because some year we're gonna be underspending, but the roof comes in the beginning part of it.
I'm just looking at what's the aggregate over the 9 years.
And this is, obviously we have to work this through, but this is what we're planning on doing.
Okay, so 12 million?
And, yeah, that's what, I would say 10 to 12 would be fair. And this is, actually, I didn't credit, Dr. Grossi was part of this analysis too, in terms of him originally proposing that. We've been going back and forth on his analyses with Cindy, and to figure out how we might make that work within the capital spend that we already had.
Question about timing and why this is coming tonight, and if a decision needs to be made tonight versus when we're talking about priorities in December for Imagine.
This will be the time we would normally bring this forward for summer work projects. And the work that will happen with this will be done prior to the Imagine work starting. And we felt it important that if we had these projects coming down the road, we needed to not lose sight of that as well, because these are the things that needed to be done. This would be the normal time we would bring that in order to get the bids out, in order to have the work done that summer is projected for. And we're also switching to a new architect of record that has to be a part of this process.
I'm very confused, but that may just be me. The stadium, is that something is that something that has been, I'm confused, was that brought forward prior, the upgrades to the stadium?
No.
Okay, because that's 1.75, I don't understand how that's coming forward without a proposal.
I'm sorry, I'm not following you, Jackie.
Well, it's put here as it needs to go out to bid this summer, correct?
It would need to go out to bid, it would need to go out to bid probably by February or March, to be included, it is going to be a separate project from what is currently bidding now for the summer of 2019.
And when was this I feel like I missed something. When was this identified as a need?
After the artificial turf was replaced this summer, there were some comments made to me that the stadium building it's in a lot of disrepair. It looks very weathered. And the amount of work that needs to be done there is going to be beyond our internal staff's capability. So I had thought about moving it forward. There wasn't enough time to include the work in the bid that is currently out on the street for the summer of 2019. So I'm looking at proposing a separate bid package after the first of the year to make these renovations.
So I think what happened, Jackie, is the Imagine project force is not the right word. We basically looked at the book of, there's a whole book of maintenance that's been sitting out there with, I think we're in year 8 of 10 years. And we've got this whole list of projects. So what we did, in response to Imagine, we tried to merge those two together. And one of the things we did is we looked at a definitive list of things that had to be done. And the stadium came up. Now, the timing of the stadium might be something, in response to what you're saying, I think that got moved up by virtue of us looking at what the book of work that we had to be done and what could wait for Imagine to be over. And the state of the stadium was such that we didn't feel that could wait for 6 years again, we're making estimates it's going to be 6 years. But in the priority scheme of the repair of certain facilities, that was one we felt we needed to take care of sooner rather than later.
I guess I don't understand how this, and I'm feeling a little deja vu with the baseball, the baseball field when the netting turned into new dugouts and that number doesn't explain I don't get the sense of what is urgent in terms of repairs. I hear things about, the bathrooms. Then is everything that's a part of that number something that there was a needs assessment done or something that, it just feels like a number is there, and the way that it's being told, and I'm sure there's more to the story than, we looked around and someone said it looks awful, we need to fix it. But Fred, the things that you laid out in terms of painting and the bathrooms and the concessions, I don't understand how we put something that's $1.75 million in without having some understanding of why that needs to happen now, or if all of it needs to happen. And that's my confusion with that.
Well, I would respond to that and say it doesn't all need to happen now. I think originally if Imagine weren't even in the picture, we would probably be doing this work over a period of years. So what we're looking at doing now is sort of bundling it together and taking care of it so it's out of the way. So we're actually accelerating the spend from future years to get it done and out of the way. So let's say Imagine weren't even in the picture, we'd probably be doing this over 2 to 3 summers. So part of what you're seeing here is an attempt to move work, to shift work around, to shift priorities around, so we could then free up those funds in the years when Imagine may need it, and at the same time take care of things that we feel can't wait. Now, in terms of the number and what it represents, this is a budgetary number, and I trust Fred and his staff that it's a good number not to exceed, but you'll get a real number when we come time, when it actually goes out to bid. We'll actually have a better number, and we have a lot more detail. We can certainly provide you detail of how Fred arrived at this number also.
I would, my Linda did that, okay? I'm either saying that this discussion needs to happen when we talk about Imagine funding, or if it's presented as is, I am not in support of this. And it's just, It's so against what we just, to put the Imagine name on this, I think is bad. We went through a discussion about planning, and this one to me is like something came out of the blue. And I like you, I've not heard of it. It's just, it's out of the blue, and the level of communication is not enough for me to act this time.
Then I would suggest that we pull the item. Come back at a later time.
So if there are other questions, please, everyone, email them so that we can get some more clarity.
The next item is the approval of the estimated tax levy. And this item is in compliance with board goal, strategic plan, goal 6, strategy 3, district policy 4:20, 4:40, 4:150.
Good evening again. The Board of Education is being asked tonight to approve the tentative levy. The final approval of the levy will be in December, and a question was asked previously about how a tentative levy can be changed, and it absolutely can be changed higher or lower before the final levy. Cindy and I have spent a lot of time discussing the levy, looking at the financial condition of the district, and it is our recommendation that the district consider approving the full 2.1% increase. We believe that the decision that you're making as it relates to the tax levy is directly related to your decision of how much fund balance reserves you want to use for capital projects, and whether, what probability you want to have of having a balanced budget going forward. They're all connected. And it's ironic that they're all kind of lined up at the same time, but I think, Tom had mentioned long-term vision there. These are kind of what it's about. I mean, you're looking at long-term type of things. The district does have healthy fund balance reserves. That's obviously the greatest asset of the school district. And certainly, it sounds like at least a portion of the fund balance reserves will be used for capital projects, or that's likely. So the question then becomes, how much fund balance reserves want to be used for deficits, to cover deficits? My concern when I'm analyzing a school district is not so much fund balance reserves, but the magnitude of deficit spending, the gap between revenues and expenditures. That is what ultimately drives the fiscal health of the school district. So for example, next year, if your expenditures go up 3%, and I don't know what it's going to be, but just use that for example, that's $2.4 million increase in expenditures. Where's the money going to come from to cover that $2.4 million in expenditures? Is either going to come from the tax levy increase, because that's the only source of revenue increase that you have available to you, or it's going to come from fund balance reserves. So if it comes from fund balance reserves, that means there's less money for the Imagine project. But of greater concern would be, again, the gap. So I just, as I was sitting there today, I just did a hypothetical of, let's just say that the Board of Education decides to freeze for 1 year. Because we've talked about other scenarios. But let's just say we're just going to freeze for 1 year. It's not a commitment that we're going to freeze going forward. And let's just say expenses grow at 3% a year. Again, as I mentioned, you'd have a $2.4 million deficit next year. But let's say the years after that, you say, okay, we're going to capture the 2.1% growth in revenues, and our expenditures are going to grow at 3%. Well, first of all, you're starting behind the 8 ball already, because your revenues are $2.4 million less than your expenditures, so the growth changes. So your deficits would grow from 2.4 to 3.2 to 4 million to 4.9 to 5.9 million dollars. So that means that you'd spend $20 million, to exhaust $20 million worth of fund balance reserves over 5 years, which the district can absorb. But the concern is that your deficit in year 5 is now $5.9 million. You're spending essentially $6 million more than you're bringing in annually. If you do that, it's unsustainable. And so the reality is, again, I don't have a handle on your expenditures, and I think that you know, the district needs to do everything it can to become efficient with its expenditures and all that, and its operations. But if, the way I see it, you're gonna spend money for education, and you kind of have two options of funding it. One is to try to cover it by gradually raising taxes at CPI, which was the recommendation of the Oak Park Task Force that spoke at one of the meetings I was at. Or you freeze it, which is good short term, but then you're put in a position that you have to ask for a $6, $8, $10, $12 million referendum increase to get back to balanced budgets. So it's just my belief that it makes better sense to try to move along every year with balanced budgets. And try to make every attempt possible to raise your revenues at CPI, and try, you know, getting deep into your budget as much as possible. There are things that are beyond your control, and try to have expenditures grow at that same rate. And if you can do that, in theory, mathematically, you would never go to referendum. If you go the other route, it's going to accelerate the need to go to referendum. And I'm not convinced that this district can't survive for many, many years without going to referendum if they continue to raise their real estate taxes at CPI and are able to do what they can with the expenditures. And then I think just the added benefit, but I don't think that it should be contingent upon it, is that if in fact you do elect to apply for the property tax grant, you're still going to be lowering your taxes by 8.5% next year. I mean, it would go back up the following year, or at least partially the following year, but so they get the tax relief. Question?
Sold.
No, I appreciate your perspective. I have been one that's been more leaning towards curbing it, but I think I'm in favor of levying at the CPI and holding our costs to that level. Those two, if one without the other is futile. So that's the direction that I'm in favor of in a strong way. And you know, with recognition, and if we can provide abatement one time, those kind of things, that's all good stuff for our city.
My problem is the assumptions, okay? We have no forecast to show us where we're at, where we expect to be based on our expenditures, on our enrollment, et cetera, right? I for one believe that we can control our costs. I think a lot of our cost controls sits in the recruiting and hiring process. I think it's there to be had. I think there's been a lack of discipline for a very, very long time. All right, and I think we have an outstanding individual running our human resources department who's going to be putting all of that together. But that being said, I understand if our expenses grow at 3%, okay? I get that, but we don't know. All right, there's nothing here, we don't have the projections to show us. We don't know, okay, our enrollments have been off. Okay, I think we're off by, I don't know how many kids this year, how many students, it's either 50 or 100, something like that. 98. 98? Okay. So those are things that give me concern. We also have not, we've talked, there was a plan in 2013 to spend down the deficit very slowly, to have a very slow arc, so that we get to when we get to the point when we need a referendum, we don't have such a gap between expenditures and revenues that we would have a situation where we have a referendum requirement that couldn't possibly be passed. But that plan, because of various things, all right, we're not where we're supposed to be in 2018. You know, we're still ahead of the game financially, all right. And I understand what's coming down the pike with Imagine, and I understand these things that we're looking at. I can't support taking full CPI.
And I respect this, because you're right, I mean, there's things we don't know, and there's always things we don't know. There's things we don't know on the positive side or the negative side. I mean, obviously, your biggest driver is what your cost of labor is gonna be over the next 5 years.
Right.
Which I don't know what that is, and I probably, you know, at this moment in time, nobody knows what that's gonna be. And there's things that can happen positively, there's things that can happen negatively. But I would say that in the landscape of things that are beyond your control, there's a higher probability that something negative is gonna hit your district than positive. In other words, I don't think that's a date's gonna come through and they're gonna say, we're gonna start giving more money to school districts. But I do think that there's a possibility, because it's a stated platform of our governor, as it relates to property tax reform. What does that mean? I mean, that may give a property tax freeze in and of itself, number one, which fund balance reserves would be good to have if that happens. And then number two, you know, there's just 2 days ago, are you guys ed read or?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Ed read at their meeting, they were saying it's the pension shift's inevitable.
The what?
Pension shift's inevitable. Again, we've heard it for years, so I know that, but again, it's kind of a, you wouldn't want, in my opinion, you wouldn't want to be put in a position where if you're in a deficit spiral and this happens, where all of a sudden you are totally at the mercy of a referendum to provide the quality of education you want to for your kids. That's my only fear. If there was certainty in what was happening in Springfield, I may change my opinion, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think storing up acorns during uncertainty is a good thing. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. I totally respect what you're saying. That's just my thought about it.
So, if I may, I mean, the thing that you talked about earlier today, the grant, the 5.8 million abatement that we would do, and then we would get 3.8 million back. What's the percentage likelihood that that's really real?
It's as close to 100% as possible.
Okay, without being 100%.
No, I mean, it says it'll fund, $50 million is set aside already, for sure.
Right, statewide, for all these 21 districts that are.
For statewide, they ranked all 850 school
Or
districts.
15,
They
okay.
said they're gonna prioritize it by order of tax rate. You guys are 15.
Mhm.
If the first 21 people take it, that's 50 million.
Right, so we're in that, so
you're in that.
So
So unless there's something that's unforeseen, and again, you know, this is something that we'll be talking about, or even the final levy in December, but I'm meeting twice, I'm doing a co-presentation with ISB twice on Monday, so I'll have better information as it relates to that. And then, but I mean, they've already announced, like, I think it was like May 20th, you get the $3.8 million, and the tax abatement, you control it. You adopt a resolution to lower your taxes by 5.8. It's submitted to the county certifies it to Springfield, and you get your money.
right, so I mean, to me, it takes us off the hook, at least in my mind, it takes me off the hook for making a hard decision. To me, it's an easy decision. Tom is persuasive with his point about balanced budget. I believe, I understand the long-term ramifications of a short-term decision that, you know, in the moment feels good and feels right, but if we can abate more by this nice little sweetheart deal with the way it's set up, you know, it's the catbird seat that we're in. So for right now, for this year, I'm inclined strongly to approve a 2.1% increase, knowing that it's not really going to be a 2.1% impact on taxpayers. That's the bottom line. 8-point-something%, you said?
8.5.
Reduction, right? And so that's the equation has changed. It's changed since 2013. And Fred, your point is well taken, that we're not at the point in our fund reserves as low as it was projected where it should be, but at the same time, we have this huge Imagine report in front of us. So things are in flux. So, you know, I feel like I was the one banging the drum on zero last year and this year until this plot twist came along. So I think that changes everything. But I still think we should, again, great points that you make about these hires of new personnel, teachers, to have the discipline to really hold the hiring committee's feet to the fire, whatever cliche works, so that we're really truly following the model of replacing more expensive, longer-term staff with someone long-term, because those numbers are really scary when we don't do it the way we have said that we should. So, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I will move to approve the estimated levy as amended and ask for a second.
Second.
Mr. Barron?
Yes?
Mr. Eisner?
Yes.
Mr. Arkin?
No.
Mr. Costi?
Yes.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Ms. Cassell?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The following items were just for information. They were presented at the committee as a whole with the evidence-based funding plan and the Illinois State School Report Card.
Is there any future agenda items?
Yeah, I have two, if I can get them out. I wrote them down. One was, I wanted to get some clarity of, just like the strategic plan and a little bit less so on the gender policy, we got some updates from time to time. And I'm wondering if it makes sense to build into our agenda over the next couple of months, updates on how we're doing on the equity policy. That's a request, and we can add that to our agenda.
Sure.
And then the second one was the recommendations from Imagine. Maybe think of something else that I guess at the right time I'd like us to debate, which is the formation of a facilities committee that involves on an ongoing basis both B&G, some student voice and some community voice to help us in the long term on deciding or helping us decide some of the sequencing year-to-year issues of the Imagine plan. But we can talk about that afterwards, but I'd like to see something on the agenda in the spring.
That is part of the recommended process that we would be bringing forward to have a facility study.
Okay. Anyone else? So I move we adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.